Hey guys, welcome into part 2 of this draw along tutorial series. So in the first episode we basically got most of the iris in and a little bit of the fur just underneath the eye here. In this second part of the tutorial we're probably going to sort of come up and over the eye now, because again that's quite a light area of fur that we'd like to get in quite early on, and then maybe just extend the fur down underneath this part of the eye. So again, we're going to be using our tattoo needles and our slice tools to do this, or your X-Acto knife or whatever it is you want to use. And we'll just get straight into it. So if you haven't already seen the first part of this tutorial, I'll leave a link to that in the description, or I'll leave a card up in the corner. And if you can, pop over and have a look at that one, and it will sort of get you up to speed with where we're at. Now the aim of this tutorial is to give, I'm sort of hoping to aim it more towards beginners and intermediates, but really it's going to be suitable for sort of any level really. But I'm trying to keep the details not sort of hyper realistic, not overly complicated, and just sort of keeping it more, like I say, beginner friendly. So we're going to start off sort of how I do the majority of my fur, just by laying in this underneath layer, this sort of base layer of fur. And the reason for this is just, instead of sort of just leaving it blank and just trying to go in with those top highlights, the way to create quite realistic looking fur is to layer it. Pretty much in any medium is to create layers, and that's sort of the goal that we have today. These base layers I want to be quite dark, so quite faded. I don't want them to be too stark, just because I want to sort of put lighter layers on top of them. So this is sort of like the shadowed area for the fur that you're going to see deep down beneath the fur that's laying on top. So all that fur that's sort of underneath in the shadows. So I'm trying to use landmarks on sort of my reference photo and my drawing already, just to sort of predict where things are going to stop and start. So as you can see, this sort of bright bit of fur that comes down here, it's sort of in line just with the tip of where this fur sort of comes off, sort of this light fur that just sort of ends here. So it's in a nice sort of line, so that's what I'm sort of aiming for. I'm trying to get sort of down to here, just because that's going to be a nice little reference point for me. Most of my fur, I'm not sort of laying it down in straight lines, just like directly next to each other. I'm sort of curving it and overlapping it, just to sort of add to the realism aspect. And just being careful as we come up towards where this eye is, making sure that we've got the fur in the right place. And you can use other tattoo needles for this. So here I've got my Magnum tattoo needle, so this is a Magnum weaved style. So basically it's got a weaved pattern, so sort of staggered needles on the bottom and also needles on the top. So this is a number 5, so that means it's got 5 actual needles to it. 3 are on the bottom and 2 are on the top, and this just allows you to get a more realistic fur texture, just because it's not as regimented with how it's going to lay down that fur. Like I say, I'm just turning my reference photo just because I want to give myself the best opportunity to get this in the right place. There are going to be things that are slightly off that I haven't got in the exact right place, but we're not aiming for perfection with this, we're just sort of going for the general feel. So as you can see, there's not like single lines being put down, there is multiple lines being put down, so it goes a little bit quicker when you're using something like a Magnum style tattoo needle. This thing that I've got it in, this is just a hand poke tool. It's broken obviously on the inside. So basically this will just hold one tattoo needle, you just thread it through the end, it pokes out there, and then you just tighten it up with this. This one I've got it's a little bit flimsy, so I've tightened it and basically it's pushed the tattoo needle against this bit of plastic and cracked it. It still works, but it's not as sturdy as I'd like it to be. You can get metal ones or, you know, better plastic ones, but they work quite well. Like I say, we're just working on these layers at the minute. The fur that's sort of just above this guy's eye, you can see the sort of individual lightest strands on the very top. But underneath, if you look sort of through those top layers of fur, there's not a lot of shadow. It's just sort of a nice light tone. So that's sort of what we're going for here. We're just sort of putting down fur strokes, just to try and emulate what that's going to look like when we put those final highlights on top. If you go straight in and try and put those on, you'll have nothing underneath and it'll look a little bit odd. You won't have much depth to the fur. As we start to go in with the lighter, sort of brighter looking fur, just trying to play about with the different tattoo needles or different tools that I've got that are going to allow us to get those brighter highlights. Again, we're just working our way around it, just feeling our way into this drawing still. You know, sometimes it works just to press a bit harder with the tattoo needles. Other times it works to get, you know, your X-Acto knife out, or your number 11 blade, your slice blade, whatever you want to use. And if you want to know a little bit more about the slice blades, I do have a video. I'll pop a card up to it now. In this video I've just gone through and reviewed a couple of the slice tools, and then I've done another video where I've used only the slice tools, no tattoo needles, to create a whole image basically, and I did it on a squirrel. So I have a video for that one as well. So I'll pop another card up for that. And, you know, if you want to go see how these slice tools work, you know, solely on a picture, then head over there and that should give you a bit of an idea. So making sure when I'm coming down here and adding these slightly lighter fur strokes, I'm not covering up all of the fainter fur that's underneath, just because I do want some of that to show through. And I'll come back through and sort of change certain aspects of this drawing. You know, I might come through and lighten up this area, I might mess about with the eye a little bit. So even though I've moved on to this area above the eye, doesn't mean that every other area is complete. And the fur on this this cat's got a bit of a almost scratchy texture to it, so that's what we're trying to emulate as well. It's not really got much soft, fluffy looking fur, which to be honest can be a bit of a godsend, because it's a bit easier to create this style of fur than it is, let's say, a fluffy texture, because you can only use, like I say, just lines. Use other things like fiberglass brushes and things like that, but mostly you're just using lines to create the texture. So again, these aren't the brightest highlights. This is sort of the fur that I can see through these deepest layers. Those really bright highlights, they're going to come later on in the drawing. I'm not going to come sort of all the way up here just yet. I just wanted to get this, almost like this rim of fur that's just coming across, just so that we've got something that gives this eye, you know, the area that the eye sits in, just a little bit of form. It's just going to help us plot things out as we sort of move further into the drawing. So we're going to work a little bit more on the underneath of this eye. I'm probably going to go with this my weaved tattoo needle. I might even use a little bit of the single point tattoo needle as well, my round liner. Just because, like I say, it gives a bit of a nicer fur texture, a little bit more of a random fur texture. We're making sure that we're not going to put any fur as yet in these black areas, just because they're going to be a slightly different technique. And luckily in my line art I've put fur strokes in, showing the direction of the fur. So I've actually got lines on my work, I don't know if you can see, but you'll be able to see in the line art that it's coming down this way. So by putting them in on the reference, on the, you're sort of tracing on your line art that you're going to trace onto the board, it gives you a little bit of a better chance of getting it in the right place, of getting that fur going in the right place, in the right direction. Because now I know that this area just underneath is going to have this black area as well. And there we go, so now we've got like this little area that we know we're going to be working within, and it's just going to be, like I say, this area here. Also what we're doing, we're looking through and seeing how much shadows, how much fur we've got sort of deep within, and how many, is it a dark shadow, is it not too dark? So for example, if you look up at this white area just up here, the shadows that you've got through that are quite faint, and so you know that it's either going to be white fur, quite bright fur, and it's also going to be quite densely packed, so we haven't left much of the black showing. Whereas as we come down here, you've got quite a lot more black showing through and a lot of darker greys showing through. So we're going to need to make sure that we don't cover up all of these under fur layers that we're about to put in. I'm really concentrating on the direction of this fur when it sort of curves up, sort of where those darker spots are. I'm just trying to plan in where they're going to be, or roughly where they're going to be. Like I say, it doesn't have to be exact. Trying to keep these strokes as random as possible. Like I say, I don't want them all in a line, I don't want them to look too regimented, so I'm sort of dotting all over the place. And each line that I'm putting down has a slight curve to it as well. Very rare will you ever get fur that's, dead straight. There'll always be a little bend in it. You'll probably notice when I'm turning my board, I'm keeping my reference photo on sort of the same plane, so I'm turning it to sort of the exact location, and that's just because it's easy to look over then and not have to sort of work out where I am or what angle I need to be pulling my strokes at. And again, trying to keep my lines and my fur strokes the right sort of length. So obviously as we're coming up towards this sort of curved area compared to over here, the ones over here are going to be a lot longer than the ones over here, which are quite short. So I'm trying to keep that same sort of level. Started getting them in. I'm now just going to go in and try and get some of the lighter first. So I didn't sort of carry on around this area, so that's where I'm going to come now and just slowly start building up those levels of brightness. Like I say, I'll probably end up putting another layer over this of an even brighter type of stroke using a different tool, but for now, so we won't know that until we move on further into the drawing. For these sort of more highlighted strokes, the same principle applies. So I'm overlapping them. I'm trying to keep them a little bit random, but roughly in the, like I say, that same direction that they're meant to be going. Curving them, overlapping them, making them a little bit wiggly, just because, like I say, that is that randomness and that imperfection that's going to give it a little bit more realism. There's nothing too complex about what I'm doing at the minute. Like I say, I'm just laying down fur in that order. That light fur that's going to be sort of showing you the direction that you're meant to be going in. And then just slowly building up those highlights. I'm looking for that subtle colour change as well, that sort of tonal change. So obviously this area that's sort of underneath the eye, directly underneath the eye that we worked on in the first video, where that comes round and down, all of that's a brighter shade of white than what's just underneath it. So I need to make sure either that I need to hype up this brightness a little bit, or I need to make sure that the brightness that I'm putting in now isn't going to overpower that. So already I can tell that it's the sort of level of brightness is starting to rival that of just underneath the eye. So what we'll need to do is hype up this brightness, because otherwise it's not going to stand out. And to be honest, it needs to be brighter anyway. I'll try out this slice tool, just because this sort of gives me that next level of brightness. I don't want to go, like I say, crazy with it. So this is what I meant when I said I'll get a level up to an okay looking standard, and then obviously throughout the drawing I'll need to go back and make things brighter, make things darker. So this is a prime example. Now that I've got this next layer in, or starting to get that next layer in, just underneath it, this area needs brightening up quite a bit. Again, being careful not to go and cover up all the work that's underneath. Again, blowing off that dust just so that I can get an accurate understanding of how light I've gone. So because we've made this area brighter, we're also going to need to make that area just above a little bit brighter as well, because that's going to now change all the tones that are around it just by making that a little bit brighter. Again, most of this is going to be covered by that fur that we're going to lay on top of it, but still want to get it where I'm happy. So already, just by bumping up those areas of brightness, it's made everything around it look even darker. So it's made this underneath section that was the same tone go even darker. So now we'll try going back in, adding in those highlights that we were working on before. Like I say, I'm not being overly cautious with where I'm putting each exact stroke. You know, as long as we're going roughly in the right place. I don't need it to be absolutely spot on and absolutely perfect. If you guys want to do that, you know, that's absolutely fine, but I'd end up working on this piece for weeks and weeks if that was the case. And it's only a small piece, so I don't really want to be spending that long sort of completing this one. Like my tiger piece, I wanted things to be sort of pretty spot on with that one. just because it was a big piece and I was working on it for so long. So you've got a little bit of sort of motivation to keep everything looking good and in the right place as best you can. But sometimes you want to be a bit more free. Well, I do anyway. So now when I'm comparing this sort of level of brightness to the one just above it, it's a lot more accurate to what the reference photo is, which is good. But again, that could change. We might need to brighten it up as we get other things in, because as we get other things in, we might brighten up one area, which then throws off another area, which throws off another area. So as this little bit of fur just starts to curve down and around this sort of nook of his nose, it's still that same level of brightness as the one above it. So we'll just slowly sort of fade this out. So we need to be careful because we're getting to the point where if we start to overwork it a little bit, just by like messing around, getting the brightnesses sort of amped up a little bit and things like that, that we run the risk of losing a lot of this under fur that we spent quite a while putting in, and that's not something that we want to do. So we might leave that just there, just for the time being, just because we don't want to, like I say, go too far with it. He says as he keeps messing. Okay. I think we're going to carry on down because we're on a bit of a roll with that area. We're just going to start plotting in where these next aspects are going to be. Again, just being careful that we don't, go too bright in these black areas or add too much into them. Just because we don't want to mess around with the contrast too much. Because I sort of like how the contrast looks at the minute. And again, just keep an eye on the fur direction and the fur length. And I don't have a specific way in which I do anything, so I don't always work, let's say, from the top left and work to the bottom right. I sort of just dot wherever I sort of feel like it. So I may have, a sudden urge to do the nose, and then all of a sudden we're working over there. And again, we're just being incredibly light, just because we don't want to be, as I've said before, putting too many strokes or going a bit too crazy in areas and then sort of losing where we're meant to be. So anytime that I'm using this blue holder, this is the Magnum weaved tattoo needle. And sometimes it's just about testing out things just to see if they're going to work or not. You know, I didn't know when I started this that I was going to be using this tattoo needle for, you know, these specific areas. I've just tested out on a small area. I liked how it reacted and how it worked, so that's why I've continued with it. I've got an awful lot of tattoo needles. You know, I didn't know which ones I was buying, so I just bought a load and tested them out just to find out sort of which ones work the best for me. Hard to move my reference photo when you've got gloves on. As you can see on this area, there's quite a lot of black showing through. So again, I don't want to cover that up. I want to try and keep that. You need to be careful you don't overwork these areas. Like I say, these areas aren't by far perfect and by far got the first strokes in the right place, but I'm just sort of giving myself a general idea, and that's all it is. Because like I said, this cat, it could be any cat. Take the same photo the following day, or you know, a couple of minutes later, and it would have moved and hairs would be laying differently. So you know, unless you're doing a specific pet portrait, you don't need to be exact, and that's all we're going for, just a rough interpretation of where the fur is. So if you look closely at the reference photo, even in these areas of black, there are still some very light areas of fur, some sort of very faint areas of fur. And these are things that we still want to put in. Because even though you've got these black areas, they're not just solid black. They are either areas of shadow or areas of black fur. And sometimes just by putting a few little hair strokes and fur strokes in there, it just gives it that extra little bit of realism. And these are the things that people are going to pick up when they look at your work. Maybe not knowingly, but subconsciously. You see these little areas, just adds a bit more depth. So using that finger rub technique just to darken areas slightly. Just lift that up just so you can see what we've been doing a little bit closer. So sometimes until you get some other aspects in, sort of in regards to the form, your picture might look a little bit unusual just because you haven't got an awful lot going on. But fingers crossed it'll all turn out okay. I never truly know how a picture's going to turn out, so I'm always a little bit nervous. So again, I think we need to stop messing with this area now, because that's going to start to lose some of the details. Now we're just following that same technique. Start with these next sort of fur strokes, plotting where things are going to be. And for this area, I think the one round liner tattoo needle is going to be the best. It just allows me to be a bit lighter and a bit more random with my strokes without going a bit sort of overboard. So the techniques that I show you in this, you know, they don't just apply to this specific animal. You could be doing any animal. You could be doing a dog, a cheetah, a lion, and it's all. I always use the same sort of technique. So I always put this sort of base layer in, and then sort of slowly, like I say, work my way up. So just because if you're following along with this one, hopefully it'll give you a bit of the technique that I use just to put into your own work. Or at least try it out. If you haven't, you know, you may have your own technique that you want to use, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not saying this is, you know, the only way to tackle fur. This is just my way. It's the way I do it. But, you know, if you have any tips for me, any techniques that I could try out, you know, pop them in the comments, let me know. Be happy to give them a go. So you can see an awful lot of black fur on the reference photo in the area that I'm working on. So this, the tattoo needle, that single point tattoo needle, or even just an X-Acto knife like I'm using now, I think that's going to work best for that area. The reason I don't use an X-Acto knife straight away, I find it's harder to gauge your pressure with an X-Acto knife. And I find that it always comes out a little bit brighter. So in order to keep my first strokes really light, I use, like I say, that tattoo needle. Definitely starting to need a new blade on this one now, just because they're not as bright as I want them to be. Fur down here, almost a lot, starting to go into a much longer style. So again, even these black areas, they're getting a little bit of fur in them. You may not be able to pick it up on camera, but they are getting some very light fur strokes in there. Just because I don't want them to look just like empty black spaces that I haven't filled in. give you a little bit of a close-up view. Like I say, this is the technique that we're just using throughout the entire piece. I think we'll finish off this last little bit down here, and then we'll probably call that session complete. Seems like a good place to stop. So this last little bit of fur here is a little bit denser because it's blurred out. So that's why I've switched up to my Magnum tattoo needle. There are some areas that I just want to touch up, so I'm just going to go back in with my black Faber-Castell Pit Artist pen. I'm just trying to work out where there were some areas that came out a little bit too bright. All this is doing is just re-establishing some of those darker areas. I think we'll leave that one there then. I know it's been a little bit of a heavy session with pretty much just the majority fur base, but I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you've been able to pick up some techniques from it, and I'll see you again in the next video.